Have you ever wondered how our grandparents managed to put meals on the table during some of the hardest times in history? Back then, money was tight, jobs were scarce, and families had to stretch every dollar, every ingredient, and every bite. But even with so little, they found ways to feed their families with love, creativity, and heart. Today, we are taking a journey back in time to remember 25 humble, budget-friendly meals our grandparents made during tough times. These meals were not fancy, but they were full of warmth, resilience, and resourcefulness. Many of them used just a few simple ingredients, things like beans, potatoes, bread, or rice. But they helped entire families get through some of the most difficult periods in history. Whether you are here for nostalgia, ideas to save money, or just want to honor how far we have come, this list is for you. 1. Beans and rice. Back in the day, beans and rice weren't just a dish, they were survival. For many families, this was the meal that showed up on the table multiple times a week, sometimes even daily. Beans were cheap, especially dried beans, and could be bought in bulk. Rice was even cheaper and could stretch a small portion into a full plate. Together, they formed a complete protein, making this dish surprisingly nutritious. Grandparents would soak the beans overnight, then cook them slowly on the stovetop with maybe an onion, a bit of salt, and whatever seasonings were on hand. If there was a ham bone or bacon grease left from another meal, it went into the pot to add flavor. The rice was cooked separately and fluffed with care. Sometimes, kids didn't even know they were eating poor. The meal was hearty, warm, and tasted like home. You could serve a big group with just a few scoops of each, and it filled everyone up. It wasn't glamorous, but it didn't need to be. Beans and rice taught us that food didn't have to be expensive to be good, and that simple meals could carry a whole family through hard times with grace. 2. Fried potatoes and onions. When money ran low and meat was a luxury, fried potatoes and onions stepped in to fill the plate and the belly. This dish was about as humble as it gets, but it was golden, crispy, and comforting in the best way. All it took was a few potatoes, an onion, a bit of oil or bacon fat, and some salt and pepper. Our grandparents would slice the potatoes thin, chop the onions, and fry them together in a cast iron skillet. The smell alone could bring kids running to the kitchen. The potatoes would crisp up on the outside while staying soft inside, and the onions would turn sweet and caramelized. If they had a leftover sausage link or a slice of bacon, they might chop it up and throw it in. But most of the time, it was just potatoes and onions, cooked slowly with care and patience, served on a plate with maybe some bread or fried egg if available. It was a full meal. It was poor folks' food, sure, but it was real food. Hot, filling, and made with love. For many, this dish brings back memories of childhood when you could hear the sizzle from the kitchen and know that dinner, however simple, was going to be satisfying. 3. Cabbage and sausage. Cabbage is one of the most underrated vegetables when it comes to feeding a family on a budget. It's cheap, it lasts a long time, and it stretches like you wouldn't believe. Our grandparents knew this, and one of the best ways they used it was with a little sausage, just enough for flavor. They'd chop up the cabbage and cook it low and slow in a pot with some sliced sausage or hot dogs. Not a lot, just enough to add that meaty taste. Sometimes they'd use smoked sausage if they could afford it, or even leftover ham from a holiday. The meat wasn't the star, the cabbage was. Some added a splash of vinegar or a pinch of sugar to bring out the natural sweetness of the cabbage. Others threw in a potato or two to bulk it up. No fancy spices, no complicated steps, just a pot, a few ingredients, and time. This dish stuck to your ribs. It was hot, soft, and savory. perfect for cold days or empty wallets, and it reminded everyone that with a little creativity, you didn't need much to make something that felt like a full meal. 4. Homemade vegetable soup. There's a certain magic in a pot of vegetable soup that's made from what's already in the kitchen. No two batches were ever exactly the same, and that was part of the charm. Our grandparents would gather up whatever they had: carrots, potatoes, celery, onions, maybe a can of green beans or some frozen corn, and toss it all into a pot. The broth might come from saved meat drippings, a leftover ham bone, or even just seasoned water. They'd season it with salt, pepper, and love. If they had beans or barley, they'd add those too to make the soup more filling. Maybe a bit of tomato paste or stewed tomatoes went in for richness. This wasn't the kind of soup you'd find in a restaurant. It was thinner, sometimes a little watery, and always simple. But it was warm, nourishing, and it lasted. You could stretch it for days, feed a family, and still have enough to freeze or share with a neighbor. Homemade soup wasn't just food. It was community. It was thrift. And it was proof that even in lean times, you could serve a meal that warmed more than just the body. 5. Lentil stew. Lentils were a quiet hero in hard times. They were cheap, easy to store, quick to cook, and packed with nutrients. They didn't need much, just water, heat, and a little seasoning to become a satisfying meal. Our grandparents understood their value, and lentil stew became a go-to dish when money was tight. They'd simmer lentils with chopped onions, carrots, potatoes, and whatever herbs were on hand. If there was a soup bone, it went in. If not, a spoonful of bacon grease did the trick. A little garlic, a bay leaf, or just some black pepper could turn a basic pot into something special. The result was hearty, flavorful, and surprisingly filling. You could eat it on its own, serve it over rice, or sop it up with bread, and it kept well, which meant it could be lunch for the next few days too. Lentil stew wasn't fancy, but it was dependable. It was nourishing, and in its own quiet way, it reminded families that you didn't need much to feed the people you love. 6. Oatmeal with whatever's on hand. There were mornings and evenings when there just wasn't enough for a full meal. That's when oatmeal came in. Rolled oats were cheap, filling, and easy to make, and you didn't need milk or sugar to make them work, just water and heat. Our grandparents would cook a big pot of oats and let each child flavor theirs with whatever was around. Maybe a spoonful of jam, a drizzle of honey, a few slices of banana, or just a dash of cinnamon. Sometimes it was plain, and that was okay too. What mattered wasn't the topping. It was that everyone got a warm bowl of something that stuck to their ribs and kept them going. Oatmeal was the great equalizer. Rich or poor, everyone knew the comfort of a steaming bowl in the morning. And in the hardest times, that comfort meant more than flavor. 7. Peanut butter and bread. There were days when dinner needed to be simple, not fancy, not complicated, not anything more than what kept a family full. Peanut butter and bread answered that call more times than we can count. A loaf of bread was cheap, and peanut butter, dense with protein, fat, and calories, was one of the most budget-friendly foods available. Our grandparents relied on it when paychecks were thin, or when a storm kept them home and the pantry nearly empty. What made this meal special was how versatile it was. Sometimes the bread was fresh and soft. Sometimes it was stale and toasted to bring it back to life. Sometimes A thin smear of jelly made its way in, and sometimes peanut butter alone had to do the job. Children loved it, adults respected it, and everyone understood its purpose. It was a meal that did not ask for much. No stove, no oven, no complicated steps. Just 2 slices of bread and a generous spoonful of peanut butter, enough to get through another long day. Looking back, many remember the comfort it brought. Quiet, steady, dependable. A sandwich that reminded families that even in scarcity, something simple could still feel enough. 8. Macaroni and tomatoes. Macaroni and tomatoes was one of those meals that perfectly captured the spirit of making do with what you had. Our grandparents would cook a pot of elbow macaroni until tender, then mix it with stewed tomatoes or canned tomato sauce. A little salt, a bit of pepper, maybe a pat of butter if there was any available. That was all it needed. This dish was not flashy, and it was not meant to be. It was warm, easy, and cheap, and it filled a hungry belly with very little effort. Many families served it several nights a week because pasta was inexpensive and tomatoes could be canned at home during the summer. For children, the tangy tomato and soft pasta became a familiar comfort. For adults, it was a reminder that dinner did not have to be complicated to be satisfying. Some families added onions or a handful of cheese when they could afford it. But most of the time, the meal stayed simple. It symbolized resilience, the idea that even in tough moments, a pot of pasta and tomatoes could still bring people together at the table. 9. Fried cabbage and noodles. Fried cabbage and noodles, sometimes called haluski in Eastern European households, was a lifesaver during times of hardship. Cabbage was cheap, durable, and could last weeks in a cool pantry. When sautéed slowly with onions and mixed with buttered noodles, it transformed into a surprisingly hearty meal. Our grandparents appreciated cabbage for what it offered: volume, warmth, and the ability to stretch a small amount of food into something filling. A single head of cabbage could feed an entire family. If butter was scarce, they used bacon drippings or oil. If noodles were limited, they made their own with flour and eggs. This meal was not about luxury. It was about survival with dignity. The smell of cabbage frying in a pan is a memory passed down through generations. Many remember the way it perfumed the whole house, bringing everyone to the kitchen. Even today, it is a nostalgic dish for many families, reminding them of a time when creativity in the kitchen meant everything. 10. Potato soup. Potato soup was one of the most resourceful meals our grandparents made. Potatoes were inexpensive and often grown in backyard gardens. Milk, water, a little salt, maybe some onions. Those simple ingredients came together to create a warm bowl of comfort. This soup had countless variations. Some families mashed the potatoes for a creamier texture, while others kept them chunky. If there was leftover ham or bacon, it was chopped and added in. If not, the soup remained plain, but still completely satisfying. Potato soup stretched ingredients further than most meals. A few potatoes could become several servings, enough to last for lunch the next day. It was also gentle on the stomach and perfect for cold nights or sick days. Most importantly, this dish reminded families that nourishment did not need to be complicated or expensive. In the hardest times, potato soup was a warm reminder that love and care could turn even the simplest food into something meaningful. 11. Baked beans on toast. Baked beans on toast may sound humble, but for many families, it was a lifesaver. Beans were cheap, came in large cans and were filling enough to serve as a main meal. Toast added texture and helped create a plate that felt satisfying, even when money was scarce. Our grandparents appreciated canned-baked beans because they required no extra ingredients, no long cooking time, and no fuss. Toasting the bread, whether on a cast iron skillet, under a broiler, or over a wood stove, brought warmth and crunch. The salty sweet beans soaked into the bread, turning it into something comforting and unexpectedly hearty. This dish became especially popular during the Great Depression and wartime rationing because it used shelf-stable ingredients. Families could store beans for months and always have something ready for emergencies. Today, it remains a nostalgic reminder of practicality, simplicity, and the ability to make the best out of what you have. 12. Scrambled eggs and rice. Scrambled eggs and rice was a clever way to turn a small amount of food into a full meal. Eggs were often gathered from backyard chickens, making them one of the most affordable protein sources available. Rice was bought in bulk and used to stretch dishes further. Our grandparents would cook rice, then scramble eggs into it with onions, seasoning, or leftover vegetables. Some added soy sauce or butter if they had it. The result was a warm, filling dish that could feed many people with minimal ingredients. This meal reflects a deeper truth. Families in hard times learned how to make small things go a long way. It was nutritious, inexpensive, and adaptable. Children loved it because it tasted like a comforting mashup of flavors. Adults valued it because it kept everyone full without costing much. Scrambled eggs and rice is one of those dishes that quietly supported families when times were tough. Simple, reliable, and full of heart, just like the people who made it. 13. Chili without the meat. Chili without the meat was a Depression-era staple that delivered comfort without the cost. When ground beef became too expensive, families turned to beans. Black beans, kidney beans, pinto beans, whatever was on hand. Canned or dry, it didn't matter. What mattered was making something warm, spicy, and filling. Our grandparents would start by sautéing onions, garlic if they had it, and adding a can of tomatoes or tomato paste. The beans went in next, along with whatever spices they had: paprika, cumin, chili powder. They made do, and sometimes chili just meant beans, tomatoes, and a little heat. This dish could simmer all afternoon on the stove, perfuming the house with a scent that promised dinner was coming. It was often served with crackers, bread, or over rice to stretch it further. It was adaptable. Some added corn, others tossed in leftover veggies. Even without meat, it felt hearty and strong. It filled you up, gave you warmth, and tasted like something that belonged on a Sunday table. It was proof that flavor didn't come from wealth. It came from wisdom, resourcefulness, and heart. 14. Creamed corn over biscuits. This meal might seem strange to younger generations, but creamed corn over biscuits was a warm, comforting dish that many families relied on when money was low and bellies were hungry. It was built from pantry staples: canned or homemade creamed corn and a batch of scratch-made biscuits. Grandparents would whip up a simple white gravy with butter, flour, and milk if they had it, then stir in corn to make it creamy and sweet. The hot mixture was spooned generously over warm biscuits, soaking into the bread and creating something rich and filling. Biscuits were often made without milk or butter when necessary, using water or lard instead. And yet, they still managed to rise in the oven and bring a bit of warmth to the dinner table. This dish was especially popular in Southern households, where corn and flour were kitchen staples. It was soft, savory, and a little sweet, with just enough fat to feel indulgent. It reminded families that comfort could come from the simplest foods, and that a warm biscuit with a spoonful of corn could feel like a real meal, even when the pantry looked nearly empty. 15. Boiled potatoes and salt. Perhaps the most humble dish on this entire list. Boiled potatoes with nothing more than salt. No butter, no cream, not even pepper. Just plain potatoes, peeled or unpeeled, chopped and dropped into boiling water. For families who could barely afford flour or meat, potatoes were salvation. Cheap, available year-round, and able to grow in almost any soil, they became the foundation of countless meals. Boiling them preserved their nutrients and made them easy to digest, especially for children or the elderly. Sometimes they were mashed lightly with a fork. Sometimes they were served in a bowl with just the cooking water. Sometimes, if a little fat was on hand, it would be drizzled over the top. But often, it is just salt. And yet, many people remember these meals with surprising fondness. Not because they were exciting, but because they were consistent. They meant there was food on the table no matter how little else there was. This dish is a quiet symbol of resilience. It doesn't shout. It doesn't impress. But it nourished day after day in homes where money was tight, but love was strong. 16. Rice pudding. Rice pudding was more than dessert. It was a way to turn leftovers into something sweet, warm, and comforting. When there was leftover rice, grandparents never let it go to waste. They'd turn it into a pudding that soothed the soul and filled empty stomachs. Milk, sugar, cinnamon, and sometimes a dash of vanilla were added to the rice and simmered until creamy. If raisins were available, they were stirred in too. It was spooned into bowls and eaten warm or cold, depending on the season. For many kids growing up during hard times, rice pudding felt like a special treat. It used simple ingredients, but tasted like love. Even when dinner was just soup or beans, knowing there would be rice pudding after made the evening feel brighter. The beauty of this dish was its flexibility. No milk, use water and a bit more sugar. No cinnamon, skip it. The base was always the same, and the outcome was always satisfying. It's a reminder that even in scarcity, sweetness could be found, not just on the spoon, but in the way families cared for each other, offering a little comfort even when times were rough. 17. Cornbread and milk. Cornbread and milk might sound strange to some, but for those who grew up in the rural South or during the Great Depression, it was a normal and cherished meal. Leftover cornbread, often dry and crumbly, was crumbled into a bowl and covered with cold milk. Some ate it with buttermilk, others with sweet milk. It wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to feed. When there wasn't enough for dinner, or when the kitchen was running low, this dish came to the rescue. It required no stove, no heat, and very little effort. But it filled the belly, especially at the end of a long day. Grandparents would sometimes add a little sugar or maybe a pinch of salt. Others kept it plain and ate it slowly, letting the milk soften the cornbread into something almost like cereal. It's a meal built from leftovers, but it's remembered with pride, because it showed how families stretched what they had and still managed to share a moment around the table. 18. Hot dog stew. Hot dog stew was one of the most creative ways to stretch meat and make it last. Regular meat was too expensive for many families, but hot dogs? They were affordable and just enough to bring flavor to a pot of vegetables, beans, and broth. Our grandparents would slice up a few hot dogs and toss them into a pot with potatoes, carrots, onions, sometimes even canned corn or beans. The broth was made from water, bouillon cubes, or whatever drippings were saved from other meals. This stew simmered on the stove and filled the home with the smell of something hearty, something real. It wasn't fancy, and it wasn't trying to be. It was just dinner. Honest, reliable, and comforting. Even today, some families still make versions of this dish, especially on tight weeks or at the end of the month, because it works. It fills the stomach, stretches the budget, and reminds us that sometimes all it takes is a little imagination to feed the people we love. 19. Canned tuna patties. Canned tuna was a lifeline for many households. It was cheap, shelf-stable, and didn't need refrigeration. A huge plus when electricity wasn't always a guarantee. One of the most beloved ways our grandparents used it? Tuna patties. They'd open a can or two of tuna, mix it with breadcrumbs or crushed crackers, a little chopped onion, and an egg if they had one. Sometimes mustard or a bit of mayo made its way in. Then they'd shape the mixture into small patties and fry them in a pan until golden brown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was full of protein and flavor. Served with a side of canned peas, mashed potatoes, or just a slice of bread, tuna patties were more than just dinner. They were a reminder that even the smallest pantry could provide something satisfying. Many of us grew up watching our grandparents shape those little cakes in the kitchen, passing down not just a recipe, but a way of thinking. Make it stretch, make it last, and never waste what can still nourish. 20. Pasta with butter and peas. There were many nights when dinner needed to be fast, cheap, and filling. For that, pasta with butter and peas was a go-to in many homes. A box of pasta could be bought for pennies, and frozen peas were affordable and easy to store. Butter brought it all together. Our grandparents would boil the pasta, usually elbow macaroni or spaghetti, and toss it with a pat of butter, or sometimes margarine if that's what they had. A handful of peas went in next, adding color, sweetness, and just enough freshness to make the dish feel like more than it was. It sounds simple, and it was, but the beauty of it lay in that very simplicity. It could be served in minutes. It didn't require meat, cheese, or fancy sauces, just what was in the pantry and freezer. This dish fed tired workers, hungry kids, and families trying to make ends meet. And it did so with warmth and grace. Even today, it remains a comfort food. For many who grew up in frugal homes where love was served right alongside dinner. 21. Tomato gravy over rice. Tomato gravy over rice was a Southern tradition born from the need to stretch ingredients and find comfort in hard times. It started with just a can of stewed tomatoes or tomato paste, flour, oil, and maybe a little sugar, all cooked down into a thick, tangy gravy. Rice was cheap and filling, making it the perfect base. Our grandparents would cook a big pot of it, pour the tomato gravy over the top, and serve it like it was a treat. And for many, it truly was. If they had onions or bell peppers, those might be cooked in with the gravy. Some used bacon grease instead of oil to deepen the flavor. But even plain, it was rich, satisfying, and full of heart. This dish reminds us how inventive families had to be. With no meat, no cheese, no protein, just pantry basics, they created meals that filled the home with warmth. It was about dignity in the face of scarcity and turning humble ingredients into something truly memorable. Leftover vegetable hash. Nothing went to waste in our grandparents' kitchens. Vegetable hash was how they made sure of it. Any bits of vegetables, and carrots, potatoes, beans, onions, greens, were diced up and thrown into a skillet, sometimes with a bit of oil or leftover fat, and fried together into something hearty and flavorful. It was never the same meal twice, and that's what made it special. One day it might include leftover cabbage, the next day a chopped up baked potato from the night before. Occasionally, an egg was cracked over the top, or a sprinkle of cheese added if they were lucky. Hash wasn't just a meal. It was a mindset. It said, "We value every scrap, every ounce, every flavor." And it taught generations to respect food, plan ahead, and see potential in the forgotten corners of the fridge. Many families still make some version of this dish today, maybe with fresh veggies, maybe with new spices, but always with the same spirit: frugality, creativity, and care. Egg and bread scramble. When you had a couple of eggs and stale bread, you had dinner. The egg and bread scramble, sometimes called poor man's French toast, was quick, easy, and surprisingly filling. Our grandparents would tear old bread into pieces, heat some grease or butter in a pan, and pour beaten eggs over the top. The bread soaked up the egg, creating a soft, golden, savory dish. If onions or herbs were available, they went in too. It didn't take much to bring this dish to life, just heat, a pan, and a little attention. Some families added a pinch of salt or pepper. Others sprinkled it with sugar and ate it more like a breakfast for dinner treat. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. And more than that, it showed how even leftovers could feel new again. With just a couple of ingredients, this dish fed growing kids, tired parents, and anyone who needed a bite of something warm after a long day. 24. Depression cake. No eggs, no butter. Also known as wacky cake or crazy cake, this dessert came straight out of the Great Depression, when families couldn't afford milk, eggs, or butter, but still wanted something sweet to end the day. Made with flour, sugar, cocoa powder, baking soda, vinegar, and water, this cake rose beautifully in the oven and came out moist and chocolatey. No one missed the expensive ingredients because the flavor was all there. Our grandparents made this cake for birthdays, holidays, and Sunday suppers. It was a reminder that even in lean times, there could still be celebration, still be joy. Topped with powdered sugar or eaten plain, it brought smiles to the table. This cake is a beautiful example of resilience, taking what little you have and making something worth sharing. Many families still pass down the recipe today, not just for the taste, but for the story it tells, that where there is love and creativity, there's always enough. 25. Water pie. Water pie might sound like a joke, but it was very real. During the Depression, when even eggs and milk were out of reach, families still managed to make pie using the most basic ingredients: water, sugar, flour, butter, and sometimes vanilla. They would pour water into an unbaked pie crust, mix in the flour and sugar, add a bit of butter, and bake it. As it cooked, the filling thickened into a custard-like texture, sweet and simple. It wasn't fancy, and it wasn't something you'd find at a bakery, but it brought dessert to a table that might otherwise go without. And for many kids, it tasted like a rare treat. Water pie was a testament to the creativity born out of desperation. It showed that even when the cupboard seemed bare, there could still be sweetness, still be comfort, still be a little slice of joy.